Hello and welcome to our second Sunday screening and chat. My name is Elizabeth Rockey. I am the founder and face behind Rocky Road to Reading. I am so glad that you are here on this Sunday afternoon with me to get to watch our dyslexic children. We want to shout out and give a special thank you to Parents for Reading Justice for allowing us the showing of this film. We're so thankful to them. This month is indeed Dyslexia Awareness Month, so we want to share with you again that definition. It's so important that we say the word dyslexia and we know what it means. So what even is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word spelling, poor spelling, and decoding difficulties. About 85% of our students with a specific learning disability have a primary learning disability in reading and language. Perhaps as many as 1 in 5 of the whole population have symptoms of dyslexia. Last week, we were able to listen to the story of Michael and his mom, Pam, and their fight for getting what he needed to succeed as a student with dyslexia. And this week, we're diving into this film, Our Dyslexic Children, which kind of zooms out bigger picture to move beyond just a single family dealing with dyslexia to what a whole community can do when they work together. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our film, Our Dyslexic Children. We hope that you have grabbed your popcorn, grabbed yourself a drink or your afternoon coffee or pick-me-up, and please enjoy Our Dyslexic Children.
The first time I realized that I can read or that I learned differently than other kids around me was probably in preschool. Not being able to understand things and just learning what words meant and how to spell them. So then you're just left wondering, why can't I? What makes me, why am I different? Why can't I do things that most kids could? Dyslexia, I guess I didn't really know that until I was older. I didn't know. I remember sitting during silent reading and looking at this book and just not being able to understand what was happening. I just couldn't read it. The other kids could write their names without the teacher helping them. And I couldn't. I had to ask for their help. They would try to help me with homework, and I would get really upset. Sorry. Just frustration. And just putting so much work in, and just it was too much.
For many parents, the story starts in the same way. The kids are happy, carefree, self-assured. They look forward to their first day of kindergarten. They're eager to learn and make new friends. But early on, the parents realize there is something wrong.
When I'm in a reading group and it's my turn to read, it gets stressful because I don't know the words, and then some kid in my class says, you just don't want to read because you don't know how.
How does it make you feel? Talk about how you feel.
Very upset about it. And I don't belong there anymore.
Are you upset at the school or are you upset at yourself?
Upset at myself more than the school.
Even though it's not your fault, you realize that, right?
No, not all the time.
They're not progressing like their peers. Teachers start labeling them as slow, lazy, fidgety, or as troublemakers. Parents see their once happy and confident children begin to slip away. This is the story of the families who fought to bring them back.
The hardest subject, I think, was definitely math or anything that had to do with writing or reading. And any grade basically was difficult.
First in third and fourth grade, I would cry a whole lot in my room.
Tatum was now crying every day after school, saying I'm stupid.
I would just always go into school and feel stupid and just not know what to do. I would just never sleep. I couldn't sleep, and I tried to go to sleep and try to say this would be better, but I was just lying to myself.
I felt like I wasn't like doing my best, because if I was doing my best, then I should be able to read.
Reading it over and over and over, and I just didn't understand it.
I really don't like reading. Reading time was like the worst part of the day for me.
Lily was having trouble writing. And I'm thinking to myself as a parent, what is this? We've talked about everything. She knows what to expect. What's going on here?
On the National Assessment of Educational Progress, about a third of kids nationally are considered proficient, and proficiency is what's required to be destined for, say, a 4-year college degree.
Dr. Louisa Motes has been a professor, psychologist, and researcher. She's the author of numerous science journal articles on how we learn to read.
Another third or so are considered basic. And basic means you aren't very good at it and you aren't proficient. And about a third are below basic. Below basic means you really do not have the reading skills to function at in grade level academic work.
Scientific studies have estimated between 5 to 12% of U.S. children have dyslexia. It is the most commonly diagnosed learning disorder in this group.
IND, find, IND.
IND, find, IND.
Who can come up and do that?
Nick?
Reading experts describe dyslexia as a reading disability that is neurological in origin. Reading and spelling involve the ability to notice and manipulate the individual sounds, known as phonemes, that make up words.
Great job. Thank you.
People with dyslexia have a more difficult time doing this, and too often, they don't get past the struggling stage unless they get the right kind of help. When they don't get that help, school can be unbearable and leave damaging scars.
I'm a third generation of someone growing up in Upper Arlington. I love Upper Arlington. I attended Barrington Elementary School, and my earliest recollection of education was the last few minutes before summer break at the end of first grade. Our teacher decided that you couldn't get out of first grade without spelling your last name. My last name being James, you know, I sat there about halfway back and waiting to fail, and because I knew I couldn't spell it. I don't know why other kids got it and I didn't. When she got to me, I said something like, I don't know how, and she turned red in the face and just was, today I know she was very frustrated, but she called me stupid in front of the whole class. And I lived that with me every day. It's affected my entire life. As a father of 4 dyslexic children, I know what the pain is all about.
Joe was our third child to be diagnosed with dyslexia. So we went in with a diagnosis to start with. We were told that he was too young to test and that they didn't believe in dyslexia and that they had this brand new program called Reading Recovery. And Reading Recovery was imported by Ohio State University. They applied it long and hard with Joseph, longer than he was ever supposed to be in the program.
Reading Recovery is a short-term intervention program for first graders who have difficulty with reading and writing. The program promotes the philosophy that children would better understand what they were reading if they used whole words by sight, context, and very limited phonics to read. This instructional method is known as a whole language approach.
And then Joe's going into 4th grade, and Nancy meets his teacher in the hallway, and she takes that opportunity to say, I don't know what we're going to do. Joe has no skills. I don't know how to teach him. This is his teacher telling her. And that's when the school psychologist says to us, you know, Joe's going to have to learn there's other ways to get information besides reading. Now, I know she was saying it to give us some comfort, you know, but it also was a clear message that Upper Arlington had no intention of ever teaching our child to read.
That's the thing, they didn't really teach me how to read. I think they just kind of like expected me to do it on my own.
So I went up to the school teachers and I said, Teo can't read. And they said, of course he can. Look at how many books he's reading. And I said, if you can read a book that is completely closed, then you're not reading. He memorized a book. He's a clever kid. He's a smart kid, but he's compensating for something he doesn't have.
We trusted that the professionals knew what they were doing, and that the sad result is that our family was harmed.
I can tell you, I go in there, hey, my name is, this is my child, this is how my child learns, this is what's going on. And it's like, when you talk, they're like, you don't know that. It's like, who are you? You don't know your kid. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Like, this is what's going on.
I was really just stunned because in all of my experience as an educator, there's not a whole lot out there about how to teach a dyslexic.
You know, I knew these like teachers because, you know, my brothers, you know, like they taught them, and I thought they were just like, you know, super educated and like nice women and men, but like really they were just like, they just had no clue how to teach me. And that's like something that really killed me.
One Sunday morning, Joe clearly tells us, he says, if you send me back, I will kill myself, okay? And so we had a psychologist friend come to the house that afternoon and sit in the living room with us and hear us talk about this. And he looks at Nancy and me, he says, you gotta find another school for Joe. So very quickly, Nancy and Joe got on a plane, flew over to New York and to Kildonan. He had told his mom, if you send me here, my skills will leap. That's how Joe talked about it. Kildonan saved his life and changed his life because everyone there is trained in Orton Gillingham.
Orton Gillingham is a multi-sensory approach where children are explicitly and systematically taught the way letters and sounds correspond.
Can I have everybody put their tappers up? Yeah. So do C, sync.
This approach is referred to as a phonics approach. Vigorous debate between the two philosophies, whole language and phonics, has raged on for decades. Congress created the National Reading Panel in response to our nation's reading crisis to settle the debate over how best to teach kids to read. 100,000 studies were reviewed. The outcomes showed that whole language wasn't producing proficient readers, but phonics helped all kids become better readers, not just students with dyslexia.
It's not a belief system. There's science behind how students learn to read.
First, there's the misunderstanding of how kids learn to read, and the idea that you really emphasize the motivation for reading, which is that stories are wonderful and reading is interesting and learning is great, and the engagement will come if they're really turned on by the subject matter. Well, no. Because the problem is they don't know how to read the words, and you have to teach them how to do that. And actually, when you teach them how to do that, they are enthralled because they are competent.
What are the letters, Callie?
C, H, I, L, D.
Awesome. Go ahead and build it, please.
You can't make the argument that early reading education should not be about decoding words, and we have to stop suspending disbelief around the idea that kids need to learn how to decode to eventually make meaning, and we know how kids do that. They don't do that naturally by playing with books.
Cameron and Nancy James found a solution for their son, but they felt they had to help make sure what happened to Joe didn't happen to more kids.
You know, over time, we would get phone calls from parents who are telling your same story. You know, you got this bright kid and he's not learning or she's not learning, and there's resistance in the school. And I think that is so painful.
In some schools, they just ignore it, because if they label it, then they have to rush it with resources. If the school refuses to identify the child, the family has these hard decisions. They have a decision to pull the child out and get them outside help, and that's what families with resources do. And if the family doesn't have resources or the awareness, they just accept the fact their child is a poor student. They're just tracked to be low potential.
That begins to really, make you think, what can you do? I can tell them, go to this website, read this book.
The James family sought to press the state of Ohio to officially endorse the phonics teaching methods for students struggling with reading proficiency.
We started testifying before the state school board and the House and the Senate. We couldn't get anything to move. And about that same time, I was called to testify before the House, and they were going to take a vote on phonics back in the schools. And the Reading Recovery folks got there.
Reading Recovery, the very same educational organization from Ohio State University that argues against any meaningful use of phonics, attempted to stop the change. The House hearing limited testimonies from the public.
They never got to public participation and allowed Reading Recovery to propose that they write the definition of phonics in that Senate bill. And they agreed.
The Reading Recovery representatives wrote their own weaker definition of phonics and the role it can play in learning to read.
At some point you think, I've taken every avenue I think that we can take. And we thought, okay, here's one.
Having lost the battle in state government, Cameron and Nancy James pressed ahead with their personal reimbursement case. Federal law requires public schools to provide children with disabilities an appropriate education for free. Since the Upper Arlington School District refused to teach Joe the methods proven to work, the James family sought repayment for their alternative school efforts. At first, their case was dismissed on a technicality, but with the assistance of special education attorney Pete Wright, the James family went all the way to the Supreme Court to fight for their right for a trial. They prepared their case.
And I had Nancy and Cameron write a letter telling the story of the case. And we call this the letter to the stranger, the theme being on that if the letter is lost in a street and found by a stranger will understand all of the complicated legal issues and will feel the facts in their gut and then in their heart.
Dear Dr. Schaefer, words can never describe how proud I am to be the father of Joseph Albert James. In spite of severe handicapping conditions, he learned.
That letter was the key to the case.
To bolster the James family claim that young Joe was unfairly denied access to a phonics-based reading curriculum, Pete Wright decided to shine a light on what he suspected were the biased incentives of the Upper Arlington School District.
The financial relationship between Upper Arlington, Ohio State University, Reading Recovery.
Pete remembered Ohio State first brought the Reading Recovery program to Upper Arlington.
Barrington's elementary school was the first school in the country where Reading Recovery was ever tried.
For Ohio State and their investment, the results here could impact the entire future of the program.
And so I knew that they couldn't let this whole thing fail or blow up based on litigation. So then Upper Arlington settled. The case ended at that point.
Public records requests revealed that in their settlement, the school district offered to train and provide teachers using the Orton-Gillingham phonics method. The James family agreed and thought they had brought relief to future children in need of help. The funds from the settlement allowed for exactly 2 instructors for the entire district.
School for me growing up was really complicated. So they tested all the kids and they plotted them all out on a diagram. And she told me that my dot was really far down there, away from all the other kids' dots. So as I got older, things continued to be difficult. Late elementary school was kind of when things really tumbled downhill. When I was in 4th grade, my teacher implied that I would only really need to learn basic math because I would be working fast food for the rest of my life.
So here I was attending Upper Arlington schools. I was struggling to get help for my children in reading. They say that they're giving my kids appropriate instruction, but my kids aren't making any progress. After I realized that they were dyslexic, I just assumed that the school district just didn't know and didn't understand. We had moved to that school district because it was supposed to be an excellent school district.
It was terrible because, like, I mean, all the kids were reading so fast. They could do math easily. They were never behind. And it just seemed like it was just so easy for them. And meanwhile, I was like in the back, viewing all of this and thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I so slow?
It kills you, it pulls you apart to feel as though your child is failing and to not understand why.
I began doing some investigation on reading issues and found Sally Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia, and I realized that our daughter had dyslexia. And I realized that there were really specific things that the district could do to teach her. And so when I went to the district, it was very apparent that they were not aware of dyslexia. They didn't know how to treat it.
They kept trying to ask us what it was that we did wrong in terms of the upbringing of our child, as though it was some kind of societal factor or some kind of environmental factor, rather than the way that our child is wired.
I began to realize that I could not count on, I could not trust my district to take care of my daughter.
The teachers had no idea what dyslexia was. They had no idea about the symptoms.
It was literally like they had never had to support a dyslexic child ever.
I was at a top private school, and I asked the approximately 80 teachers in the room how many had learned about dyslexia. One of the 80 teachers raised their hand.
They were not teaching dyslexic kids the way they needed to be taught. I was trying to figure out what the disconnect was. One day I was on my computer and I looked up dyslexia and Upper Arlington. I found Dyslexia Upper Arlington and Barrington Elementary, which was the elementary school that my children attended. So I clicked on it.
At the time, Joe started kindergarten at Barrington Elementary School.
And what I found was a letter to a stranger by Cameron James regarding what had happened to his children.
Joe's skills fell further and further behind those of his peers. He has continued to demonstrate a level of determination and perseverance worthy of admiration.
And I realized that they had taken this issue to court and that they had won. And it had been the year after my oldest daughter was born. 10 years after the James case, the same school district, the same building, and they still, after everything that they knew, were not identifying children as is required by federal law, and they still were not teaching our children in an appropriate manner for them to succeed in reading.
Only the silent E's.
Our district did get 2 Orton Gillingham tutors for a district of 6,000 children.
If between 5 and 12% of children have dyslexia, that could be more than 700 students in the Upper Arlington district. It rendered the program essentially ineffective.
Here we are in the same situation, back to square one essentially, with essentially no remediation services being provided for my daughter and a lot of other kids who were struggling in the district. Yeah, it was really frustrating.
When I went to the principal and when I went to the kindergarten teacher and I said, I already know Chloe has dyslexia. I have the diagnosis here. And when they said, no, we don't think so, well, that started a fight.
So in the summer of 2010, I was working with a number of students doing Orton Gillingham, and the parents came up to me and said, how do we continue this with the school system? How can we get Orton Gillingham for our children at school? I remembered that I had been told about a woman named Brenda Lewison, who was an advocate for children and who understood dyslexia. So that night, I called her out of the blue. I invited her to my home and told the parents of the children I was working with to come on the night that she was there. And when I opened the door and began letting people in, there were over 30 people.
She was to talk to us about our rights as parents and to talk to us about the James case. She was still surprised that this was going on in Upper Arlington and that children were still basically being denied the right to learn how to read. They were turning it back on the parents, saying that the parents weren't doing something, you weren't reading to your kid, you're not giving your kid enough protein at home, you need to figure this out. The school district was ignoring it.
The stories that I was learning that evening in that room were so significant. I was really taken aback that the majority of the families were from one particular elementary building, and that there had been a landmark special education case from that building. So I felt very compelled to share with the parents some history. I directed each and every one of them to look at Letter to a Stranger.
The James family had tried to get appropriate education for their children. We realized they had not been able to break through with the school system, so we knew that there would be strength in numbers.
It is urgent that this start happening now.
Soon after the meeting with Brenda Lewison, a core group of us decided that in order to get our individual children what they needed, we needed to band together.
We could affect more change if we pooled our resources and proved that this was a systemic problem across the entire district.
You have to go to war for your child because it's their one shot to do this. You can't wait for the school system to figure it out, and they're suddenly in 10th grade and they're still not able to read.
We very consciously came together to fight this en masse.
19 people signed a formal complaint, and dozens of families united to form a strategic action group. Upper Arlington Kids identified with dyslexia, or UA Kid for short. They began organizing right away.
We didn't just start making trouble at the top. We talked to the teachers, we talked to the principal, the vice principals.
We actually reached out to the superintendent. He would not meet with us.
The superintendent, the school board members.
Every school board member.
Everybody that we could basically ask to help us within the system.
We asked for their help. We said, I think the U.S. Department of Education, the federal law requires that you identify and teach our children how to read. This is what I'm looking at. I'm on the U.S. Department of Ed website. You know, I think we really need to get after this.
Some of them wouldn't even meet with us.
We're doing all that we need to do.
To identify children and to provide them with appropriate services. And that's important for you.
It was a year-long process for us to really understand what was happening. We had a series of records requests that we reviewed. We engaged with the district mediation in order to understand both perspectives.
I want this to go out to each one of our local media outlets.
The group elected officers, held weekly meetings, and developed mission objectives.
Once we get organized, once we have our mission objectives, once we do a press release, how do we change? How do we make change? And they're here to help.
We know we've done everything right, and we have followed every small step, and we have made every overture to try to come to the table and work together.
In the end, there came a moment where we had to decide what we were going to do.
There was no other option for our group and for us as individual families than to file complaints against our school district, because things were just not moving forward.
We had a brilliant attorney. Carrie Agins knew that if we filed a systemic group complaint, that the findings would be public, and so other districts could benefit.
You know, it's always challenging when individual families are trying to get a resolution for their child because they're trying their best to make sure that their child's needs are met. And that has to come first for any parent who's trying to be an advocate. Typically, though, that comes along with settlement agreements or confidentiality, and that doesn't lend itself to other parents in the community either knowing how to help their kids or the district freely sharing that resource with other families.
We decided to do both an individual and a systemic complaint. On my part, because we wanted to make sure our child got what she needed, but also we had the mindset that we wanted to hit them in as many places as possible.
And it could have gone either way.
Our letter of findings came out, and the district was found in violation on all 3 allegations.
The Ohio Department of Education ruled that Upper Arlington School District was breaking federal law for refusing to identify students with reading disabilities and not giving them the services that made a difference. The parents of UA Kid went on to press for a replacement curriculum that addressed these needs.
We're trying to get professional development in for the teachers so that that knowledge base is there and so they understand, and so that the kids who are getting amazing OG in their intervention don't go back into the classroom and are told to guess.
So after the dust settled and the letter of findings was disseminated, the district had an opportunity to go through what is called a corrective action.
We were very lucky to hire a very skilled and knowledgeable student services director. He began putting into place everything that our letter of findings required.
When I came here, there were 2 part-time Orton Gillingham teachers, and I started to discover more students. We had to increase their hours, and that required additional staffing. And that still wasn't enough, because when you're looking at a true Orton Gillingham lesson, you're looking at a minimum of 40 minutes.
Elbows up, let's tap hand, the base. And hand. Good.
So in Upper Arlington, it's a very exciting time to be there. And we've done so many things. It's hard to believe for me as a new person that came in right as all of this had happened, that it was ever different. I know that my administrators have my back. They were very open to doing what needed to be done. We were able to expand greatly, not only the number of staff we had, but just the understanding, even within the building, of what constitutes really good reading instruction. So we screen kids very young, right when they get there. We work very hard at not only screening and identifying kids early, but then getting them the appropriate intervention as quickly as we can as well.
And that's the other piece that's important, is implementing the program with fidelity as it's written. Because if you don't implement it with fidelity, you're not going to get the evidence that the research supports. Every reading specialist in our district now has that additional training, and that has made a major impact.
You would take a student who wasn't reading, and then by mid-year they were starting to read, and teachers were saying, well, wait, what are you doing? A lot of the teachers were doing really nice things. They just needed that extra, here's how to put this all together, and the pieces that are missing.
And the new curriculum went even further. Not only did children with dyslexia receive phonics-based instruction, now all children receive phonics, and the district no longer used reading recovery.
So because of the core curriculum that has been in place, we are now moving forward. We still have ways to go. I think every district does, but it's amazing what we've been able to do so far.
So if you can remember 1, and just remember where the C goes, once. Good.
I was able to bring my daughter back to the district and she is getting the education that she needs. She has been on the honor roll every single grading period since we brought her back. She feels good about herself. She wants to go to college. She has the aspirations that all kids have.
I'm right up with other kids. I'm at the same pace. And if I told you about a day of school today, it's perfect. All my teachers kind of understand me and they give me the help that I wanted.
They teach me how to ask questions and to advocate for myself. So when I go to high school or college, I can be prepared for that.
Whenever I was confused about other classes or didn't know what to do, it just kind of felt like she was always there to help everyone. And she didn't just help me, she helped a lot of other kids in my grade too.
She helps me read, which was a skill that I never really was very good at. But I do like to read books.
We're all together and we're learning and it's fun.
Education is the key to the future for everybody. It's access to the world. So if you can't access education, you are so limited in what your world will look like.
Well, right now, I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I really like the book. Yeah, I think it's fun to read. It kind of gives you a different perspective on different things, and I think that there's a lot of good messages in books. So if you can't read, you're not gonna get those messages and those stories that may shape your view and your morals. If my mom hadn't advocated for me, I probably wouldn't be able to read.
Word began to spread, and other parents of children with learning disabilities began to reach out to us. And they wanted to know, what did you do?
I'm getting a ton of calls from districts. I've gotten calls from people in Colorado. I've gotten calls from people in California. I've gotten calls from people in Atlanta.
I had 8 new groups contact me, so everybody thank you for continuing to put our name out there and inviting new people.
We were fortunate in the fact that we had Upper Arlington or UA Kid to look at and to model ourselves after. We saw that they had success because they came together as a group. We identified issues and brought them, into our meetings with district leadership, and we were able to move forward. I think that Upper Arlington had set a precedent that if you don't respond and rise to this issue, it will come back to bite you.
Prior to 2016, we had a large group of parents that were kind of organized on a Facebook group informally. We did speak before school board a number of times. Parents were continuing to be frustrated. That's when we found out about UA Kid and the steps that group had taken to actually realize change. It was really that roadmap that got us to put our group together in a formal way. We adopted the mission statement and objectives. We elected officers, and we really came up with a strategic plan of how we were going to go about getting change implemented in our district.
Welcome to the Senate Education Committee. Can we call the roll, please?
Senator Brenner?
Present.
And back home in Ohio, the parents of UA Kid have expanded their scope, bringing their campaign to the state level under the new banner, Ohio Kid. It's from this broader vantage point that they believe they have found a root cause of the problem.
Okay, our next witness will be Brett Tingley.
My name is Brett Tingley, and I am the parent of a child with dyslexia in the Upper Arlington Public Schools. I don't really know how to calculate the cost of a child being told she's stupid because she can't read. But it also brings into sharp focus the needs of hundreds of thousands, millions of children and families who are out there struggling today. We formed a grassroots parent group and found that schools know very little about dyslexia or the science of reading. The real crux of the issue, and I've studied the whole system, is the colleges of education. It's in the fields of neuropsychology, cognitive psychology, and the colleges of education are in a silo
and they're not talking. So none of this science is getting to the teachers. So Upper Arlington. What I'm coming to realize is that the colleges of education do not teach teachers how to teach reading, nor do they teach them about dyslexia.
So not that it's a learning disability, it's a teaching disability, is that they don't know how to teach the child properly.
When you go in to train teachers, it's important to identify to them, we see that you're working really, really hard, and we're going to help you. And by helping you, we're helping the students. Because if we keep the focus on what's going to work with students and what helps students, not on the adults and who says what and who gets hurt, but on the students, we'll be successful every time.
In sympathy with the teachers who have to discover all of this empowering information at a late stage in their careers. They almost always say, I am so grateful for this information. Why didn't anybody teach me this before?
If you want to do something about poverty or the number of people who are homeless or the number of people in our prisons, teach every child to read. We know how to do it, we just aren't doing it. And it's time for parents to demand that this be taught to every child.
Wherever I have seen parents become active, that's where change has happened. You rarely see districts reinvent themselves without parents being a catalyst for that.
Everybody has different stories, but you can bring all of those together as really a political force to go after the district. If they're not changing, you've got to do something about it. And you've got to see it early. You can't just accept what they're telling you. If it's not working for your kid, you need to get back in there and you need to figure it out. And you need to go to the community and organize.
You know when to say enough is enough, and don't let your voice be silenced.
There came a point when you need to fight.
The word is handful.
We fought for our children, but we were also fighting for those children whose names we will never know. Michelle Rhee, the former chancellor of the DC Public Schools, once said that education is the civil rights issue of our generation. And during the civil rights movement, conflict was necessary to move the agenda forward. There are some fundamental disagreements that exist right now about what kind of progress is possible and what strategies will be most effective. Right now, what we need to do is fight. We need to be respectful about it, but this is the time to stand up and say what you believe, because there is nothing more worthwhile than fighting for our children.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us for this Sunday screening and chat. We hope that you were as impacted and inspired by that film as we are. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I know I definitely finished my coffee and needed a couple more tissues in this film. I wanted to share and again give that special shout out and thanks to Brett and Parents for Reading Justice for allowing us to show this film to our online community. I wanted to share a little bit more about the Parents for Reading Justice. It is the educational branch of the Our Dyslexic Children Movie, Inc., a nonprofit organization founded for reading advocacy. They are thrilled now to offer their master class, Building a Parent Group. And their class currently consists of 8 courses presented by their founder and the movie star, one of those here, Brett. So we'd love for you to be sure that you check out the Parents Reading Justice Building a Dyslexia Group. There are some great resources and how you, just like they and UA Kids, impacted their whole district and indeed the state and those around them. I want to know what you thought here about this film. What were your first thoughts when you saw the film? Any emotions or reactions? I know, similar to last week with Michael, we heard students express their anger, their rage, feeling stupid, trying to be helped, but then getting upset, trying to get that help, but get upset. Being called names, slow, lazy, things like that, right? What were your reactions when you heard that? How can we as educators, if you're an educator or community member joining us live or in the playback, what are some ways we can become part of the change and become more empathetic in response to stories like these? Last week, we heard how Pat was an advocate for her son, Michael. Here we heard several stories of parents having to advocate for their students, just like Brett did for her daughter and others. Or whatever thoughts did you have? Go ahead and drop those reactions or chats, comments in the chat box. I already see a heart, so I'm really hoping that this movie indeed hit you in the heart and leaves you with some food for thought on how we can bring about change. Go ahead and keep putting those thoughts and comments in the chat box, but I want to share some of my takeaways with you and some reminders as I was watching this film. I think one of our biggest takeaways from this film is this idea, not just for students, but for families and us just as human beings, is to remember that you are not alone. You are not alone in this rocky road to reading. You are not alone in becoming that mama bear advocate or father bear, papa bear advocate. There are others just like you with similar experiences, and we want you to make sure that you don't isolate yourself. In fact, we heard and saw in this film that advocacy cannot operate in isolation. In fact, we need each other. We thrive together. In the film, we saw that they had success when they worked together as a group with a clear mission. We heard the need, and they expressed that need to band together, to pool resources, right? They had to prove that it wasn't just a single isolated issue, but that systemic issue, that highway issue that we talked about last week. I also want to recognize too from that one parent's experience that she shared, when you talk, no one listens. And I think it's really important that we listen to each other. We become empathetic and aware of others' experiences because, in fact, we need each other and we thrive in community. So my hope and a takeaway for you today is to get into community. There are lots of communities that you might be able to join to learn more about our rights, students' rights, those specifically with dyslexia. We'd love for you to consider joining the International Dyslexia Association, whether for it's your state branch, the Florida branch for our Florida friends. Become part of Decoding Dyslexia or the Reading League. Just this past week, Amplify ELA and the Science of Reading podcast shared the stories of some great parent advocates in New York City and how they are strategic in their relationships to advocate for their students, and in fact, in the creation of a new school, public school for students with reading exceptionalities and challenges. Their group is called the Literacy Academy Collective, and they had this idea and quote from the podcast. We'd love for you to check it out, that they don't want to be hoarders of information, but sharers. And I love that idea that when we get knowledge and we know better, we do better, right? We heard of that also in the middle of the film, that some teachers are just not trained. Maybe they did not get that training from their prep classes. But when we know better, we do better. And then we get together. We get to do this life and advocacy and fight as a family. I love that saying, that family fights for family. And so I really hope that you will become part of our Rocky Road to Reading journey and follow along on Facebook and Instagram. I hope that you will continue to check out our Dyslexia Awareness Month post. We have a few left here, left in the month of October, but I'd love for you to check out more resources from Rocky Road to Reading at our link tree. We have each of our lives saved there. We have some Science of Reading scoop articles that are there for you as well. But we would love to take you by the hand and again, walk alongside of you in this rocky road of reading. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for fighting with us until every child can read.